Something I noticed from the film, well, didn't notice, I guess I'll say, is there was no really mention of Trump and politics and right, the adult part of it. Was that, I mean, I guess it had to have been on purpose, right? Or was that hard to cut around? Did the kids talk about that a lot? And I'm curious how that all worked out.
I think one of the big ideas behind the program is really they say, this is your boy's state. And in that sense, they really want the kids to form their own government separate from the real world, right? And so, of course, people bring in their own politics, and obviously that informs how they act to some degree while they're there. But they form these two sort of value agnostic parties, and from scratch build them with platforms and elect leaders and everything else. But I think for us then, so what I mean by that is that even at the program, I didn't hear Trump this, Trump that all the time. So it's not like we were avoiding shooting that. It just really was less of part of the conversation than you would think, given how much media comes at us about that guy. But then
exactly.
Also in our edit, which by the way took a very long time. These kind of films,
I can't even imagine.
It took us a year to write this movie, and I just that's kind of true with the kind of films we make, cinema verite, but this one in particular, just because it was a complicated. Yes, we knew the beginning, middle, and end of who's going to win the governor race, but also there was these two state parties to build in, and all 4 characters and 1,000 supporting characters and everything else. But the choice for us was also, yes, everything in this film is going to be a microcosm for the macrocosm. There, you can't not relate our own emotions and understanding what's happening in Trump America, in the politics in Washington, to what we're seeing play out here, because it does trickle down and infuse the behavior of all these 17-year-olds. What they're modeling to some degree what they see in the adult world, of course. Yeah. But it also offered kind of a sideways approach to thinking about all these big questions of representational democracy, electoral politics, the rights and wrongs of how you run a campaign, that didn't talk about Trump. And that for us is exactly where we want to be. We as filmmakers, as people, we're trying to make sense of, all these, as Jesse mentioned, like trying to get a sense of the health of our democracy, but like not talking directly about Trump. And that's very hard, because really he is like one drop of ink into it will like stain a whole pool. Like he's just that, he just sort of infects everything. And I think so it was really interesting. There is only one time his name is mentioned. That's at the end of the film, when Ben, since we're talking spoilers, when Ben says, I took a page from the Trump playbook, right? And that's kind of all you need. I mean, you kind of know he's everywhere, right? On some level.
That's interesting. Yeah. Without actually his name being mentioned or whatever, the influence is there of what's happening. That's interesting. I wonder if Ben, and that's interesting because he's such a fan of Reagan, which I loved. He reminded me of Alex P. Keaton.
Yeah.
From Family Ties.
Totally.
That's what I imagine.
We just did a Zoom call with him last week, and he was making the case for why George W. Bush was due for a historical reappraisal and was on par with Harry Truman as a great 21st century president. And so
he's got it all worked out.
Maybe,
he might even convince
maybe
you.
He might even convince you. I love that.
He's still got the Reagan doll, but he's I think as he goes to SMU and George W's got a relationship there, he's got a soft spot for George
W doll.
That's yeah. God, that's crazy. Well, yeah, I found that interesting that he was such a Reagan fan, and then here he is pulling tactics from the Trump team.
Yeah.
In a sense, instead of pulling tactics from the Reagan era or something else, right? Because the modern era rules all, in a sense, even though you're still aware of history and you're still aware of things that have happened, you just can't help that influence that's around you. And another thing about him that I found interesting is at the beginning of the film, he says, you know, I'm not really into like, you know, hoo rowdy, you're right, like into that sort of, and then by the end of the film, I felt like that was all him. That like he was more into that. Not necessarily him, whatever, but you see him get up and confront Renee's decision about cutting off the speaker, right, in the speech that the other guy had before. So he gets up and confronts the crowd, right, and it just has these moments I just didn't expect from him, just based off of how he was in the beginning. And I think that like that energy, or what do you think it was? Like, right, the energy, the feeling from the boys, I think, right, the energy from the boys and sort of the chanting and stuff, it gets to you no matter who you are. Even if you say, I can't be affected by that, or that's not me, it ends up becoming that way.
Yeah. I mean, the speech he gives at the end there, I find one of the most extraordinary things I've ever seen, because that's extemporaneous. Like that's all words just coming out. I mean, I can't even believe that's not scripted. It's just,
yeah, you're right.
Extraordinary, like right there at spur of the moment, that those words just came out of his mouth. I mean, that is a gift as well. And I think he, over time, the confidence building for someone like him who goes to a very small school, you know, everything else, like he's made for that stage on some level, and found power in that stage, and the power, you know, sort of unlocked even more of his brilliance, really. I mean, he really is he's extremely charismatic. Actually, as a human, we knew that right away. But that ability to just off the cuff give something that well sculpted in a debate like that is amazing.
There, you know, Ben is a double amputee, and he addresses this early in the film. And so there is kind of within him a vulnerability that he's grown up with this disability, but he is a very confident, headstrong person, and he sort of really believes in self-reliance. That's the Reaganism in him, and he articulates that too in the beginning.
Yeah.
But and I think Ben's only gets a quarter of the screen time in this movie because we got 4 great characters. But I think there was really kind of a depth and complexity to Ben. And we talked about some of his kind of aggressive tactics. And I think if you know, I think a deeper Ben is, I think, and probably he himself would participate in a kind of deeper reckoning with his own psychology and how he practices politics and how that is rooted in his own identity as a person. I mean, that's how we all practice our politics, right? That's where it comes from. If you stand for anything, right? If you're not just kind of picking a bunch of things like we see Robert do it in order to get elected. And of course that comes with its own reckoning. But in a sense, Ben's aggression, you might say, is a kind of, you know, flip side to, you know, or sort of related in some way to his own identity, part of his identity. And so that's really interesting to think about. I think
they're all fearless on some level too. I will say that about all of them. And then what happens because they're so different in their backgrounds and their politics and their interests, but also so on the same level in terms of A, being open to talking to one another, and B, being as smart as each other. I mean, at Sundance, Renee and Ben, who are so equally matched but so different, would have these epic debates about, you name the topic, race in America, Israel, Palestinian conflict, like, 3-hour kind of like, heated. Wow. Those are, I mean, I would just like get my phone and I'm like, I'm just going to keep filming. This could go on forever with these guys. And that, the value of that, I think, was also, for me, not just like, we needed this quartet, this group of voices who so represent different things. I think that Ben was such a needed part of that.